All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our second Design Conversations talk at the Jacobs Institute for Design Innovation at UC Berkeley. My name is Björn Hartmann and I'm the faculty director here at the Institute. This semester's Design Conversations theme is a continuation of a series we've been hosting for 3 semesters now. For whom, by whom, designs for belonging. In this series, we consider inclusion, accessibility, and justice as they pertain to today's debates on design and technology. Asking, how can today's lead designers work to reinvent design and technology to promote alternative methodologies and ways of life? We investigate design's historical and contemporary blind spots and invite 3 distinguished speakers each semester to share how their work considers and works toward a future of belonging. I have a few reminders for you. Closed captioning is available for this talk. You can turn that on in your Zoom interface. And I want to make you aware that this presentation is being recorded. Today, we're excited to welcome our second speaker in the series, Benjamin Earl Evans from Airbnb. Before I give you a full introduction, I'd like to make a few announcements and housekeeping reminders. Our next and final speaker for the semester will be Bryce Johnson, the inclusive lead designer at Microsoft, on Friday, October 23rd. You can register for that event on our Design Conversations website, which Lauren will link in the chat in just a moment. And regarding today's talk, we encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A function, where you can also upvote questions that other attendees have asked. Benjamin will answer questions following his talk, where Eric Paulus from the Jacobs Institute and I will trade off asking your questions. The Q&A for this talk will not be recorded, and I'd also like to note that Benjamin is unable to answer questions surrounding Airbnb's IPO and metric strategies. Benjamin has also agreed to take questions through our Design Conversations Slack workspace for up to 24 hours immediately following his presentation. This is available to UC students and affiliates, and the link to join Slack can also be found on the Design Conversations website. Now, our speaker for today is Benjamin Earl Evans from Airbnb's anti-discrimination team. Benjamin's work considers the way design can be used to solve some of today's largest problems of discrimination in meaningful ways, recognizing that problems can be solved once the problem itself is understood and approached with curiosity and empathy. As the inclusive design lead, Benjamin's team works to ensure that all guests and hosts who use Airbnb services have equal access to the opportunities and services Airbnb provides, regardless of their race, sexual identity and orientation, disability, or other forms of discrimination and biases. He oversees the work both on the product side as well as the functional leadership, where he runs training and educational opportunities to broaden the understanding of discrimination in design. Benjamin's background is in classical theater, having attended the London Academy of Music and Drama before entering the design world. And he's worked in a multitude of arenas, from creating design thinking strategies for furniture companies to design support for Nike's operations. He has an entrepreneurial spirit. He also runs his own company, Offset, a collective of creative professionals who provide tools and strategies for building inclusive, meaningful design diversity. Please join us in welcoming Benjamin Earl Evans.
Thank you very much for the wonderful, warm intro. And thank you to all of the organizers for inviting me here today, and also to all of you. It's an absolute honor to be here. And what I'm going to be doing today is actually just telling you a bit of a story. It's about how we at Airbnb are learning to use design to tackle problems like disparate impact, discrimination, and bias. We'll have questions at the end, and I will be online for the next 24 hours also to answer any follow-ups via Slack. So let's get started. So if you discriminate against me, then you are an awful person. See, that's what I used to believe, and that's because the first time that I was discriminated against, I woke up on the floor bleeding. I was a kid, and a group of white kids had heard that black kids don't feel pain. And so they picked up a rock and threw it, hitting me squarely in the face. And see, the interesting thing about discrimination and being discriminated against is that often it's not the sticks and stones and words that hurt the most. It's the feeling of rejection. It's being made to feel like you don't belong. And since that day, this idea of belonging has really become a core part of what drives me. Indeed, as an adult, it's what led me to spend, I think it was nearly 6 years traveling and working in cultures around the world. When I first started that period of life, I actually turned to Airbnb to find a place to stay. And I did what I believe most guests do to book a home. You join Airbnb, you search for a place to stay, you check that the host has a vacancy on their calendar, and then you send a reservation request with a message to the host asking if you can stay. And what I expected to happen was that the host would accept my request and then welcome me. But what actually happened is that I sent a request with a message introducing myself, where I'm from, the reason for my trip, and I was rejected. A single word. So I went to my second choice, another place that I looked at to stay. I checked the calendar was vacant and then sent the message. And again, rejected. So I tried again and again. And every single time I was rejected by 12 different hosts in total, and it just didn't make any sense. You see, at the time I was a verified user. I have the money to pay, and my calendar and the calendar of the host is free. So why am I being rejected? And I began to feel that familiar sense that it might have something to do with the color of my skin. Now, on a whim, I decided to ask a friend of mine who is white to send the same message to the same dates to the same hosts. And she was accepted immediately. You see, as a company, Airbnb believes in belonging. It's our highest value. But the reality is that guests of color, people who look like me, are less likely to be accepted when booking a stay on Airbnb. And in 2016, we saw the problem of discrimination reach the public sphere, where guests of color were sharing their experiences of being discriminated against on Airbnb. And this was under the hashtag Airbnb while Black. Now, this time I was living and working in Asia, and I was writing and designing on the topic of design for different cultures and how we can bridge culture with the power of design. And Airbnb actually saw this work, and they reached out to me and said, do you want to join our company to lead a new team that's focused on seeing, is it possible to use design to tackle discrimination? You want to lead design for the anti-discrimination team, a product team that is really focused on changing our product to build equitable access. And immediately, I was excited. I mean, Airbnb is a wonderful company. It's design-led. It's a fascinating problem to work on. And then I thought about it for a moment later, and I realized that they were asking me, a Black man, to tackle racism in America, which, to be honest, didn't exactly fill me with a sense of joy. And immediately I remember thinking to myself, hell no, this is not what I want to do. But because I'm British and we do like to be polite, what I actually said out loud to the recruiter was that would be delightful. And so here I am. I lead design for the anti-discrimination team, and we are a product team that is tasked with ensuring that all hosts and guests have equitable access to amazing experiences. But the question that was waiting for me when I first joined was, well, where do you begin? How do you even begin to use design to tackle a problem like this? Now, whenever I tell people that this is the work that I do, they always offer the exact same advice. And that advice is, well, just remove profile photos. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. You know, if someone cannot see your face, then how can they discriminate against you based upon the color of your skin? So if we were to remove profile photos from the booking process, surely we'd solve this problem. But Airbnb is a platform that's built on trust. And our research team uncovered that profile photos, images of human faces, are a source of trust, comfort, and connection. Not only that, but when we did need-finding interviews with our host community, they explicitly said that they rely on profile photos to make decisions about booking requests. They're also, profile photos are also this really critical differentiator between our brand and competitors like hotels in this space. And so the cost of removing photos seemed too high to our community at that period of time. And so together with my research partners, we actually brought members of our community and psychologists into design sprints, focus groups, and other contextual interviews to try and ideate solutions to this problem. Now, we immediately got this influx of a wide variety of ideas and immediately ran into a real conflict. Because at the time, there was no precedent for this kind of work, for using product to tackle discrimination. And so there was no consensus as to what solutions could actually be. In fact, many of the ideas actually contradicted one another, and our team really couldn't agree on the right strategy to take. You see, on one side, we would have a big group of ideas that said, well, if you just remove any information that may trigger discriminatory behavior, then the problem's solved. But another group would also say, well, no, you should do the opposite of that. You should actually add information, add anything that may override bias, that will build empathy between hosts and guests, both sides of this marketplace. As an example of that can be seen here on the left-hand side. This is a guest profile photo where we have removed nearly all personal information. Whereas on the right-hand side, we go to the opposite extreme where we add a lot more information. Wondering if we can find ways to surface commonalities and build things to connect and empathize over. And as we debated different strategies and ideas and tracks of work, we simply were stuck. We didn't know what to do. And so we did what a lot of product teams actually do, which is absolutely everything. We stack ranked the order of things, and then we started to work our way through a number of different experiments. For example, removing last names, seeing if we can maybe depersonalize profile photos. Then we tried actually surfacing commonalities all within the guest profile, so that if a host saw a profile, they may see that they have friends in common. Maybe we can bridge that empathy gap. Then we also looked at things like maybe there are grammar differences between different people from different backgrounds. Maybe if we create a grammar assistant, we can neutralize these errors and boost acceptance across the board. In that first year alone, I designed nearly 30, or actually over 30 experiments to try and boost the acceptance of guests of color. And although we had some amazing insights, nothing was having a pronounced effect on boosting the acceptance rate of guests of color. And once again, we were stuck. We needed to find something, anything that worked. And so we turned to a big bet, an experiment where we would remove profile photos from the entirety of the Airbnb experience. I formed a cross-functional working group recruiting designers from different teams. And then we completed a comprehensive audit of all surfaces where profile photos were present. We then journey mapped these and tried to find out what are the key moments where a host would be looking at a guest profile photo. And then we designed a new experience where we removed profile photos across all key product surfaces. Now, when a host receives a booking request from a guest, they do not see a profile photo. However, as I was designing this new experience, something simply didn't feel right. You see, if hosts are consciously and explicitly rejecting guests based upon the color of their skin, and we've removed profile photos, then what happens when a guest arrives at the door and a host sees for the first time that they're a person of color? Will removing profile photos push an online rejection into an in-person confrontation? You see, unlike a lot of other tech companies and product teams, we simply can't run very quick and fast experiments. We have to be very, very thoughtful because the downstream effects of our work is not a hit on bookings or property damage, it's potentially a hate crime. So I went back to the drawing board that night and sat up trying to find a solution. And I did what I think a lot of us kind of end up doing when it's late and we're creatively blocked. I ended up browsing Instagram and really actually exploring all different parts of the platform. And I had a backlog of messages I had no time to get through. But in amongst them, as I delved down into that other inbox that we all have that I don't think many people check on, I noticed a message from an unread message from someone I didn't recognize. There's a message from a guy, and he said, I don't know if you remember me, but we went to school together. And as we went backwards and forwards, it actually came out that he was one of the kids who had thrown a rock at me all those years ago. He said he had seen that I had taken a job tackling discrimination, and he wanted to reach out because something triggered with him and he wanted to apologize. And he said, to this day, I don't know why I did it, why he threw the rock. I think on some level I was scared, but I don't know why. And that message really got me thinking about the way that we've been thinking about this problem, the problem of discrimination on Airbnb, because whenever we imagine the kind of person who discriminates, we typically think of people who are explicit and conscious of their hatred. But I want to play just a very quick game, a puzzle, to illustrate an insight that his message and then my team's work has really helped us connect with and understand. I'm going to show you an image for 5 seconds, and all I would like you to do is to count out how many triangles you see. Now, you don't have to call it out. I think most of us are on mute, but if you can just think of that number to yourselves. So how many triangles do you see within this? I'll just give you a couple of seconds. Right. Hopefully, I hope everyone has a number. If not, just take a guess. One of the reasons I love this image so much is that there actually aren't any triangles present within it. See, I love this game because it shows one very important thing, that our brains are continually connecting dots. We're connected and filling in information because we all have bias. And as I'm sure many of you on this call know, bias is just a series of shortcuts that our brain makes to help us make decisions in a world where we are overwhelmed with information. They are designed to keep us safe, they're amplified by stress, and they guide every single decision we make, often without us knowing. What kinds of decision? Well, how about a decision that we at Airbnb ask our hosts to make? A decision about who to stay in your home. As a host on Airbnb, you will receive a reservation request from a guest, someone that you do not know. Then you have to make a decision under stress about who to accept or who to decline. And your home is the most intimate of spaces. And we, all of us, have been biased since childhood to both fear the unknown and trust the familiar. We've also all been conditioned to view people of color as an unknown, a source of fear. Now, it's funny, even up until last year, if you were to Google 3 Black teenagers, you would get results that were predominantly mugshots showing up on the results screen. Whereas if you were to Google 3 white teenagers, you would typically get stock photos of happy families. And this wasn't fixed until last year. This is how long we have been slowly biased towards thinking that people of color are others, that they are the unknown, or that we are people to fear. My team realized that the primary problem we're solving is not one of explicit racism. It's one of implicit bias that's triggered by fear of the unknown. It's not necessarily that all hosts who reject guests of color are racist and awful people. It's that we're all a little bit racist, a little bit sexist, a little bit ageist and ableist, because we all have biases. My team realized that we're solving a problem, implicit bias, a problem that people don't know that they have. And when we view the problem space and the solution space with this lens, we realize that the solution or the way to tackle discrimination is actually not about removing information, nor is it about adding information. It's both. We have to find a way to balance people's biases by using design to show them the right thing at the right time. Now, with this new lens, we took another look at the role that profile photos play in the experience. Now, when a host receives a request from a guest, there are no photos shown. We actually replace them with these initial-based avatars. So in that way, we are removing a trigger for implicit bias and helping our hosts make more objective decisions. Then, And then if they accept the guest, and only if they accept the guest, we then bring the photos back, creating that trust and familiarity that's needed for humans to really connect. Now, our host community, indeed most of our community, do not like change. And so I anticipated that there would be a lot of backlash from our community when we rolled out this change. But something I actually didn't anticipate was internal backlash, that our own internal design teams, from ICs to managers to e-staff, were resistant to the idea of running this. There was this sense that if we remove profile photos and this is successful, then what does that mean for our platform? Does it mean that we have to continually just remove everything that makes our platform feel personal? What do we do? So what we ended up having to do with this process is actually go on a wide-ranging roadshow with every member of the product teams in our company. And to call something very clearly out, it's not that they didn't want to tackle discrimination. It's just there was an understanding gap that we realized that existed. In order to tackle this problem, we have to bring people on the journey. We actually have to be very inclusive in the way that we're building alignment towards tackling discrimination-related issues. And so over the course of about 6 months, we did 3 separate research studies. There are 60 plus presentations and indeed hundreds of meetings presenting not just the way the world will be once we have launched this experiment, but also what this means. What does this inclusive way of thinking open up for the potential of representing people in a variety of different circumstances? How does it help advance our understanding of what builds belonging? And the moment that we took people on that journey, they suddenly understood and were entirely on board across all of our teams. We eventually launched the experiment 1 week before Christmas, and to be honest, I was terrified. See, although this is a small and somewhat ephemeral change within the booking process, I was worried that we would launch it and there would be immediate backlash from our community, that bookings and other business metrics would completely tank, and that I would get this call from our CEO saying I've wrecked the core of what the platform is. But the experience itself didn't have any of those negative effects. Indeed, it worked. We increased the acceptance of not just Black guests, but actually all guests of color. Bookings were actually up across all guest segments. There were fewer rejections and more bookings. And even more impressive is that once we ran the analysis on reviews that were left after a trip, we found that Black guests in our treatment group were having great experiences, which means that we found a way to neutralize some of the bias within the booking process, increase acceptance, and create great experiences with little adverse effects to the core platform. Now, to be clear, this is just the beginning, and we have not solved discrimination. We have so much to learn, and there's still so much to do. These are societal issues that no one platform is responsible for or ever can truly solve completely. And although this story may seem like just an overwhelming success, I also want to share something vulnerable within it, a failure of mine that the process of learning how to use design to tackle this problem helped me understand. See, even though my job is to tackle bias, and even though I believe and aspire to practice empathy in all that I do, I entered this problem space from a place of bias, judging people who would discriminate through the same lens that they judged me. I viewed people who discriminate as exclusively being bad. And something that this process has taught me is that obviously we all have bias. And that being the case, we as product leaders, designers, product managers, engineers, people who make things have to understand that we cannot build products and services that make people feel included until we first confront our own biases. And this insight seems all the more relevant in today's society, where our differences are being weaponized and used to make us feel like we are more different than we are alike. This track of work has really unlocked a number of initiatives that my team is leading now to not only reduce discrimination within product experiences, but also to give our product teams the awareness, knowledge, and incentives that they need to take this work forward so that they can make inclusive product choices. One of them is called the Another Lens framework, and the creation of that was led by Anne Diaz, PM on my team, and it's a framework to help product leaders understand their bias, to help creatives be more conscious of who they're designing for. Now, you can actually access this online. If you just Google another lens, it will come up. And you'll be presented with a series of different questions that anyone can ask during the creative process to be more aware and understanding of the role that unconscious bias plays within the work that they do. Questions like, what are my lenses? Helping you understand what's your default? Who are you defaulting to designing for? Asking who might be impacted by what we're designing actually helps you consider the downstream negative effects. Or what if your assumptions are wrong is another question, helping you really figure out what am I assuming instead of validating, and who am I assuming it on behalf of? Recently, it's actually the culmination of a 2-year project. We built Project Lighthouse, which is a pretty groundbreaking effort actually to uncover, measure, and mitigate disparate impact on digital platforms. And we've released this under a common good pattern so that any company can actually use this to understand where one group is having a different experience based upon their perceived race. And more recently, we actually created this in partnership with leading civil rights groups and privacy orgs. And this is kind of a wonderful upside to working to tackle discrimination, is that the same groups that were rightly very critical of Airbnb in the early days have now come on board as our partners. So we're able to build this consensus, this fruit, this alignment towards more and more people making inclusive product choices. And basically last week, I believe it was, we actually launched inclusive design training, inclusive design 101. And this again helps us anchor into inclusion as a source of joy. This is a screenshot of one of the very first pilots where we spoke about the Another Lens framework, where we shared the story that I've just shared with you, but also really tried to share and help people understand how you can confront and challenge your own bias without ever needing to feel guilty for having it. Because that, I think, is one of the core goals of what we need to do, is to bring more and more people on this journey and not be leading with shame, but be leading with inclusion as a source of joy. And that's because I believe that design is one of the most powerful tools that we have to drive positive change in the world. It's about more than pixels or prose. It is a craft that we can use to create a better future, one in which we all feel seen for who we are, accepted wherever we go, and welcomed because we all belong. Thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
All right, thank you so much, Benjamin. We will jump into the Q&A momentarily, but before we do that, we're going to turn off the recording.